Montana Territory. 1879. The wind outside had teeth, and inside the dust-horned saloon, the air smelled like whiskey, sweat, and sawdust. Callie Whitlow dragged the broom across the warped floorboards, her apron damp with spilled ale and her pride long since wrung dry. Men shouted over poker hands, boots thudded against tables, and the piano player pounded out a crooked tune that no one listened to. She swept between the tables like a ghost, keeping her eyes down so she would not have to meet the stares that followed her steps. "Move it, girl," barked Silas Dunn, the barkeep and owner, clapping his greasy hands. "You missed a spot near the stairs." Callie bit the inside of her cheek and turned toward the corner. The broom was rough in her hands, the bristles worn to nubs. She had not come west to sweep around drunks and dodge pinches. But a job was a job, and since her father died last spring, it was the only one she could get in Whetstone Creek. She had no husband, no brothers, just the weight of her own name and a back that ached before the sun even set. She bent to sweep again when the saloon doors creaked open. Cold air swept in, and with it came a man tall enough to fill the doorway. Dust clung to his coat, his hat low over his brow, but his eyes were sharp beneath it, gray, like stone in a riverbed. He stepped inside, boots quiet on the wood, and scanned the room. The noise dipped a little. Men noticed him. Some nodded. Others looked away. Callie did not look up until he passed close by, and then only because he stopped right in front of her broom. "That yours?" he asked, voice low and even. She blinked. "The broom," he nodded once. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "It is tonight." "That right?" He looked around, then back at her. "Seems a waste." Callie straightened slowly. "I sweep, I mop. I get paid just enough to sleep upstairs and eat what is left." The man studied her for a moment, then took off his hat and held it to his chest. "Name's Zeke Prescott." She stared. "I ain't drunk. I ain't looking for trouble, and I sure as hell do not think a woman like you belongs on her knees with a broom." Callie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Zeke stepped back and looked toward the bar. "You work for Dunn?" She nodded slowly. He nodded once, then walked straight to the bar. She stood frozen, broom in hand, heart kicking in her chest like it had not in months. "What's your price?" Zeke asked Dunn, voice cutting through the noise. Dunn looked up, blinking. "Price for what?" the girl. "Callie," Dunn snorted. "She ain't for sale, Cowboy." Zeke leaned in, voice quiet but sharp. "I am not buying her, I am offering her work, real work, not sweeping up spit and sawdust." Callie stared, stunned. Her fingers tightened on the broom handle. "She's under contract," Dunn said. 2 more months on it." Zeke pulled a folded paper from inside his coat and laid it on the bar. "That enough to break it?" Dunn unfolded it. His eyes widened. "Where'd you get that kind of, you want it or not?" Zeke asked flatly. Dunn looked between him and Callie, then snatched the paper and waved a hand. "She is no longer my problem." Zeke turned on his heel, walked back toward Callie, and stopped in front of her again. "You are done here." She blinked at him. "What? You are done?" he said, quieter this time. "I have a ranch south of town. I need help, someone to keep the house, someone I can trust." Callie looked down at the broom, then back up at him. "Why me?" Zeke's jaw flexed. "Because I have seen too many women broken down by men like Dunn. You deserve better than a broom." Her throat burned. She had not cried in weeks. Not since her father's body was lowered into the dirt behind the church. She had not let herself. "Come with me," Zeke said. She looked around the saloon one last time. The men had gone back to their drinks. The piano player kept playing. No one noticed her standing there except for Zeke. She set the broom against the wall. "I will get my things." Zeke nodded once. "I will be outside." She packed quickly. It did not take long: 2 dresses, a shawl, her father's old Bible. She tied her hair back and walked down the stairs where Zeke waited beside his horse. the dusk wind tugging at his coat. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. They rode out of Whetstone Creek as the sky turned gold and violet, the town shrinking behind them. Callie rode side saddle on his spare horse, her hands tight on the reins. She did not know what waited for her out there, but it felt like the first time in a long time she was moving towards something instead of away. Zeke did not say much as they rode, and she was glad for it. The silence between them was not heavy. It was steady, like a river running deep. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was gone. The house stood alone under the stars, wooden, plain but solid. A barn off to the side, a corral, a porch with 2 chairs. Zeke helped her off the horse and walked her to the steps. "I will get your things," he said. She looked up at the house, then back at him. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." The words settled into her chest like warmth after a hard freeze. Inside, the house smelled like pine and tobacco. It was clean, but lived in. Zeke showed her to a room with a real bed and a window that looked out over the pasture. "I will let you rest," he said. "Come morning, I will show you around." She nodded, her throat thick. Zeke turned to leave but paused. "You are safe here, Callie." Then he shut the door behind him. She sat on the bed, her fingers brushing the quilt. For the first time in months, she did not feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She felt like breathing. The morning came pale and cold, the kind that painted frost on every fence rail and left breath hanging in the air like smoke. Callie stood at the basin near the kitchen window, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, water biting her skin. A sparrow hopped along the sill outside, pecking at nothing, wings shivering. Zeke had left a small pile of kindling by the stove and a note scratched on the back of a feed ledger. "Porridge in the tin. I'll be at the north fence." She hadn't expected him to leave her tasks. She hadn't expected porridge either. She found the pot warm still, tucked under a flannel square atop the stove. It smelled of oats and bay leaf, plain but comforting. She had eaten worse and with worse company. Afterward, she scrubbed the tin down and dried it with a flour sack towel that hung beside the door. Then she stepped outside. The land stretched quiet and wide, a gentle rise of hills to the west and a curl of cottonwoods following a creek bed to the east. The barn's roof slanted under the weight of last year's shingles, and a mule in the paddock watched her without blinking. The house stood alone but not forgotten. She followed the fence line north, her boots crunching over frozen grass. A quarter-mile out, she saw Zeke crouched near a post, hammer in hand, a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. "You eat?" he asked, not looking up. "I did." He stood and braced the post with his knee, driving the staple through the wire with 2 clean strikes. "Creek swelled last week, washed out the corner line, thought I'd get ahead of it." Callie took a few steps closer, the cold stinging her knuckles. "What do you want me to start with?" Zeke paused, wiped his hand on his trouser leg, and looked at her fully. "You've got a choice. I don't expect you to do what I do. I've got the stock and the land. You take the house if you want it. But if there's something you'd rather do, say it." She hadn't ever been asked that before. The question felt unfamiliar, like a gift that might be taken back if she held it too long. "I know how to sew," she said after a beat. "And make lye soap. I can keep a house." "I'd rather not handle cattle." Zeke nodded. "Then we're agreed." He bent to the next post. She stood a moment longer, watching the rhythm of his work, the way he moved without waste, the way the morning sun caught in the lines beside his eyes. There was no noise but the wind and the thud of the hammer. "I'll start with the pantry," she said. He gave a short nod without looking up. "There's jars in the cellar, apples, some beans, sugar's low. I'll bring more from town next week." She turned back toward the house, boots finding the path more surely than before. Inside, she opened the root cellar and stepped down carefully, her hand on the rail. The air was cool and damp, and the shelves held tight-sealed jars marked in neat script. She brought up what she needed, arranged them on the kitchen shelf, and set to work clearing out the drawers. Dust had gathered in corners, and a mouse had chewed through a corner sack of flour. She swept it out, patched the hole, and set a trap near the baseboard. Midday came and went. She boiled water for laundry and hung linens over the porch rail. She found a bundle of old shirts in a trunk and began to mend the worst of them, her fingers moving without thought, the needle pulling rhythm into the quiet. She didn't see Zeke again until late afternoon, when the sun had begun to slant gold through the windows. He stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands with a rag, and paused when he saw the linens fluttering beside him. "Smells like soap in there," he said. "I boiled the wash water with pine resin," she said, setting down the needle. "Cuts through the mold smell," he nodded once. "You need anything, salt, and vinegar if you've got it. I can keep things longer that way." "I'll check the shed," he said, then hesitated, his hand on the door frame. "You settle all right last night?" "I did." He studied her, then looked toward the hills. "There's a grove back behind the pasture, birch and willow, good place to think." She stood and brushed off her skirt. "Mind if I see it?" He stepped back so she could pass. "Come on then." They walked in silence through the grass, her steps lighter now, his steady beside her. The sun warmed the tops of the trees, and the wind rustled high in the branches. Birds darted through the underbrush, and the scent of damp earth rose beneath their feet. The grove opened like a secret. Thin silver trunks stretched up toward the sky, and a fallen log made a kind of bench near the old wash of a stream bed. Zeke stopped beside it. "I come here when the house gets too quiet." She sat, smoothing her palms over the rough bark. "Funny. I came west hoping for quiet. Now it feels like I don't know what to do with it." He crouched down near the stream bed, fingers sifting through the sand. "That'll pass." She looked at him, the way his mouth held still when he wasn't speaking, the way his shoulders didn't quite rest even when he sat. "You lose someone." His hand went still against the dirt. "My brother." She didn't press. The silence that followed was not awkward, it held space for grief while letting it be. "I lost my father," she said after a while. "Wasn't much left after that." He looked up, eyes steady. "You've got more now." She met his gaze, and something inside her settled. They walked back slowly, not speaking much. The sun dipped low and the wind turned sharper. At the porch, she paused by the door. "Thank you," she said. Zeke looked at her, and for the first time his expression changed, not a smile exactly, but something softer. "I told you," he said. "You deserve better." By late March, the thaw had begun in earnest. Snow still clung to the shaded north sides of rocks and fence posts, but the creek ran faster now, swollen with meltwater, and the mud sucked at boots in the low pasture. Callie stood at the edge of the barnyard, a basket balanced on her hip, watching a pair of crows tug at a length of twine caught in the rafters. She'd come to gather eggs, though the hens still laid irregularly, their rhythms thrown off by the long winter. Inside the coop, she coaxed 3 brown speckled shells into her apron and hummed low to keep the birds calm. She'd begun humming more lately, without noticing when it started. The ranch was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. The rooms held warmth from the fire, the scent of bread cooling on the sill. The days had taken on shape, tasks folded into one another, steady as knitting. She stepped out into the sunlight and found Zeke near the paddock, repairing the harness on the draft mare. He crouched low, a leather strap looped through his fingers, brow furrowed in concentration. His coat hung from a fence post, and in his shirt sleeves he looked broader somehow, solid in a way that made her chest pull tight. "You always fix your own tack?" she asked, stopping a few paces off. He glanced up without rising. Most around here do. Store-bought harness falls apart by summer. Too many hands in town lean on the blacksmith for things they ought to learn themselves. She set the basket down in the grass. My father used to say that if you don't know how something's made, you've no right to use it. Zeke smiled faintly, not with his mouth, but in the way his eyes met hers. Smart man. He was. Her voice caught in her throat, but she didn't turn away. The ache was still there, but softer now, like a bruise starting to fade. Zeke stood, brushing dirt from his palms. You ever broken a horse? She raised an eyebrow. No, I've ridden plenty, but breaking's not the same. He nodded once. I've got a colt that needs handling, not today, but soon. You want to watch, you're welcome. I'd like that. He picked up the harness and slung it over the fence rail. I won't lie, it can get rough. I've seen rough, she said evenly. Doesn't mean I shy from it. He held her gaze for a moment, then gave a short nod. I'll let you know when I'm ready. That night, she found a scrap of calico in the bottom of her trunk and began stitching a curtain for the back kitchen window. The fabric was faded, but the needle moved clean through it, and the motion steadied her hands. The wind whistled through the eaves, and from outside came the quiet sound of hooves shifting in the barn. Just before supper, Zeke stepped inside and set a small tin on the table. Found this in the shed. Vinegar. Bit cloudy, but it's still good. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the lid. You weren't joking. Smells strong enough to pickle a horse, he chuckled, low in his chest. I'll leave that to your judgment. She watched him cross to the stove where the stew pot bubbled low. He lifted the lid, sniffed once, then replaced it without comment. I added salt pork, she said. Hope that's all right. He leaned back against the counter, arms folded. You don't need to ask. This is your kitchen, same as it's my ranch. She hesitated before turning to him. Has it always been just you here? His jaw shifted slightly. For the last 5 years, my brother and I bought the land together. He passed the second winter. She didn't press. The way his shoulders stiffened told her enough. Instead, she ladled stew into 2 chipped bowls and set them on the table. After they ate, she stepped onto the porch while Zeke banked the fire. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. She leaned against the rail and looked out over the pasture, where low fog had begun to gather in the hollows. Zeke joined her a moment later, his boots soft on the planks. You always this quiet at night? She asked. Only when there's something worth listening to. She turned her chin toward him. Like what? He looked out across the field, his voice quiet. The wind in the grass. The way the hens settle after sundown. The sound of another pair of footsteps on the porch. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. You think it's foolish, me being here like this? Coming with a man I barely knew, he shook his head. You saw a way out and took it. That's not foolish. That's brave. She swallowed hard, her throat thick. I keep waiting to feel like I don't belong. You do. They stood in silence for a long moment, the kind of silence that asked nothing and offered everything. When he reached for her hand, he didn't rush it. His fingers curled gently around hers, rough and warm. She let him. I'll be up early, he said after a while, voice low. If you want to walk with me to the far ridge, you'd see elk this time of year. She looked down at their joined hands, then up at him. I'd like that. Sun rises quick past that ridge, he said. We'd have to leave before first light, she nodded. Wake me. He looked at her a moment longer. I will. Then he let go, stepped off the porch, and disappeared into the barn with the quiet ease of someone who didn't need to be seen to matter. She stood there until the fog thickened and the stars blinked through the black. Her hand still tingled where his fingers had been. And for the first time since she crossed the border into Montana, she didn't dread the morning. The ridge was still blue with shadow when Zeke knocked once on Callie's doorframe, his silhouette faint against the lamplight behind him. She was already dressed, pulling on her shawl, boots laced and scarf tied close to her neck. Together, they stepped into the cold hush before dawn, the air sharp with pine and the scent of damp bark. Zeke led the way past the lower pasture and into the thinning timber. No words passed between them, but none were needed. Callie's steps matched his, her breath steady despite the climb. The trail bent along a narrow ravine, 2 deer tracks pressed into the soft earth ahead. A hawk wheeled above them, its cry cutting briefly across the hush. At the crest, they stopped. The land fell away in slow folds, low hills, scattered brush, the silver glint of the creek in the distance. Mist clung to the hollows, and above it, the sky bloomed with light, soft and golden and vast. "There," Zeke said, pointing. A small herd of elk moved along the far tree line, their bodies half shadowed in the morning light, steam rising from their flanks. One bull turned his head, antlers catching the first rays of sun like branches dipped in fire. Callie's breath caught. "They don't even look real." "They are," Zeke said quietly. "They survive the same way we do, keep to the edges, know when to move." She crouched near a boulder and rested her hands on her knees. "I never saw anything like this back east. Everything was too close. Too loud." He looked toward the valley. "That's why I stayed. There's space here to be still." They watched the herd vanish into the trees, the quiet returning thicker than before. When they turned back, the sun had fully risen, washing the hills in honey light. Callie followed him down without speaking, the silence between them deepening into something comfortable. Back at the house, Zeke split wood while Callie fetched water from the pump. She caught his eye once as they passed in the yard, and he gave a small nod, not of greeting, but of understanding. She returned it without thinking. Later, she found a bundle of dried corn husks in the loft above the cellar, likely forgotten from last fall. She twisted them into cords for kindling, her fingers working steadily. By mid-afternoon, she had gathered the scraps into a shallow basket and stepped outside just as Zeke returned from the west fence line. He wiped his hands on his trousers. "You ever make corn dolls?" She shook her head, curious. "My ma used to talk about them, but I never learned." Zeke leaned back against the porch rail. "My brother's wife made one every autumn, said it brought luck through the winter. Never believed it, but he swore by it." Callie sat on the steps, the basket in her lap. "Why didn't she come west with you?" Zeke's jaw worked once before he answered. "She died before we left Missouri. Fever took half her town." "I'm sorry," Callie said. He nodded, a tightness in his throat he didn't try to hide. "He never really came back from that, even after we settled here." Callie twisted a husk between her fingers. "You stayed anyway." "Didn't see the point in running again," he said. "Land needed tending. Someone had to do it." She handed him a length of husk. "Show me how she made them." Zeke sat beside her, rough fingers moving slower than hers but with practiced purpose. They worked in silence, shaping arms and torsos, tying knots with twine. The wind shifted around them, stirring the leaves at their feet. When the dolls were finished, Callie lined them up on the porch rail, 2 small figures, one taller, the last with its arms outspread. Zeke studied them a moment. "She'd have liked you." Callie looked over at him. "You don't know me that well." "I know enough," he said quietly. "You work until your hands ache. You listen close. You don't ask for more than you need." She leaned back on her palms. "That's just surviving." "No," he said. "That's strength." The wind lifted a strand of her hair. She didn't brush it back. "You're not what I expected," she said. Zeke looked at her steady. "What did you expect? Someone who'd take a woman out of a saloon and expect her to pay for it in kind." He didn't look away. "That's not who I am." "I know," she said. "I figured that out the first night." They sat together until the sun began to sink. The quiet between them had changed again, not heavier, not lighter, but fuller, As she rose to go inside, Zeke stood too, brushing bark from his trousers. "Callie," he said, voice low. She turned toward him. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me." "I don't," she said. "But I do feel something." He stepped forward, slow and certain. "Me too." She lifted her chin, eyes steady. "Then we'll see where that leads." Zeke reached for her hand again, and this time she met him halfway. Spring gathered its strength slowly that year, unfolding with cautious warmth. The ground softened underfoot, the creek ran clearer, and the days stretched a little longer. Callie planted onions in the kitchen garden, her hands working through the damp soil while the sun warmed the back of her neck. Zeke passed by with a bucket of oats for the mare and paused beside the fence. "Supposed to be a frost tonight," he said. "Might want to cover those." She nodded, brushing dirt from her palms. "I've a few flour sacks inside. They'll do." He lingered a moment, looking toward the hills. "I've been thinking about building a new stall. The colt's getting too big for the one he's in." "You'll need more timber," Callie said. "That wagon's not strong enough to haul anything from the ridge." Zeke scratched behind his ear. "I know. Been meaning to fix the axle. Trouble is, I've only got 2 good boards left and no time to shape new ones." "I'll help," she said. "I can shave them down if you mark the lengths." He gave a small nod. "All right." They worked side by side near the shed, the scent of sawdust rising warm and sharp between them. Zeke steadied the planks while Callie crouched with the drawknife, her motions swift and sure. Her father had taught her the tool back in Ohio, shaping handles for garden forks and sled runners. The memory sat quiet behind her ribs, no longer painful. As the light faded, they leaned against the barn wall, palms dusted with wood. Zeke rolled his shoulders, easing the stiffness there. "You learned that from your pa?" he asked. "That and how to set a beam right," Callie said. "He had a carpenter's eye. Said the smallest mistake at the start will throw everything off before you're done." Zeke looked over at her. "That how you feel about coming west?" She rested her head back against the wood. "No. I think this was the first thing I did that started me straight." He reached for her hand, not as a question, but as something already understood. She let her fingers curl into his, thumb brushing lightly along his. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about what it means to not be alone anymore." Callie let the quiet settle between them before she spoke. "It means thinking past one day at a time." Zeke nodded. "I want to build something with you, not just fences and new stalls. A life." She turned to face him fully. "I've never been asked for anything that wasn't a burden or a debt." "I'm not asking for anything but truth," he said, "and the chance to give you steadiness. Whatever comes." Her throat tightened, not with fear, but with something deeper, a sense of having reached solid ground after years of open water. "I want that," she said. "I want you." When he kissed her, it was unhurried, honest, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise already kept. They married 2 Sundays later, with Reverend Mullen saying the words beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house. The sky was pale with cloud, and the air smelled of lilac and churned earth. Callie wore her mother's brooch pinned at her collar, and Zeke had shaved and trimmed his hair for the first time in months. The only witness was old Mrs. Tawley from the neighboring homestead, who brought a basket of sweet biscuits and wept quietly through the vows. Afterward they walked the creek path together, hand in hand, the world around them folded into peace. That summer, Callie planted beans, squash, and corn in tidy rows. Zeke repaired the barn roof and built a new pen for the pigs. They moved in rhythm, their days threaded with quiet exchanges and small glances that said more than words ever could. Each night, they returned to the porch as the sky deepened. Sometimes they spoke of the day's work. Other times they simply sat, her hand resting on his knee, his thumb tracing the back of her fingers. By autumn, The land had settled into its golds and browns. The pantry was full, the livestock fattened, and the house felt lived in, warm in the corners, familiar in its creaks. One evening, Callie stood by the hearth, a kettle hanging from the hook, and looked across the room at Zeke. "You ever think about the years ahead?" she asked. He looked up from the chair where he was oiling his boots. "All the time." She turned, hands folded. "I don't mean the work. I mean children, neighbors, a church maybe if more folks settle nearby." Zeke set the rag aside and came to stand beside her. "Whatever you want, Callie, we'll make it together." There was no rush to the way they kissed now, no fear behind it. Just the quiet certainty of two people who had chosen each other not out of desperation, but out of faith. Years from now, folks in Whetstone Creek would speak of the Prescotts as steady people. Honest. The kind who didn't raise their voices but got things done. No one would remember how Callie arrived, broom in hand, or how Zeke crossed the saloon floor with quiet purpose. But they would remember the way the house always smelled of pine and bread, the way the porch was never empty at dusk. And inside that house, through frost or bloom, through lean seasons and good, two people lived shoulder to shoulder. Not always easy, but always together, and always in love.